Having finished the in-depth Hunter Guide series to all the weapons in Monster Hunter World, it's time to move on to some advanced tips and tricks that didn't make it into the episodes. This little sub-series aims to provide you with some extra information for the weapons you use. I'm Darcblade and welcome to the advanced tactics for the Charge Blade. Now before going into these tips and tricks, I'm going to assume that you've seen the Hunter's Guide in-depth episode for the Charge Blade and have learnt the basics of the weapon, as I will be using terms taken from these videos. Now the main reason these tips weren't included in the Charge Blade episode was primarily due to length. The Charge Blade was one of the longest Hunter's Guide episodes, so a few bits and bobs were cut. Also, there were a few mistakes and lack of clarity, so hopefully this video will clear a few things up. First of all, your sword attacks. When you've performed a condensed elemental slash to actually charge up your sword, attacks made with your sword don't do extra damage in of themselves. Instead, the extra damage comes from a PHIAL burst effect that is actually added to the sword attack. If you're using impact PHIALs, this will be a fixed damage amount added to the PHIAL burst of your sword slashes, whilst if you're using elemental PHIALs, it will be a burst of elemental damage based on the amount of elemental damage you have. Which brings me on to clarifying PHIALs. In the in-depth episode I made a slight error and mixed the two up. First of all, impact PHIALs. These deal fixed damage based upon a number of factors, including your weapon's raw damage and if you're using artillery duels. When you cause an impact burst, either when your sword is charged up or via your axe, the impact PHIAL bursts cause KO damage, so can potentially knock out a monster if they're hit in the head, or exhaust them if you're hitting them elsewhere. Whilst on the flip side, elemental PHIALs are based upon the elemental stat that your weapon has and the monster's resistance to that specific element. Your raw attack and artillery skills have no effect on elemental PHIALs. So take this into account when you're setting up a build and using elemental PHIAL charge blades. Sometimes, while in axe form, it can be better to go for a combo of circle, circle and circle, then back and triangle, rather than going into a super amped elemental discharge. This is due to the spread of the super amped elemental discharge when using elemental PHIAL charge blades. The spread is very large, and on small monsters, some or a lot of the bursts can miss. This can help counter that. Another thing players should note as well is that PHIAL attacks cannot crit. So when you're going into moves like the super amped elemental discharge, when you want to unleash all your PHIALs, only the first 3 hits of the move will actually crit. So this may affect your builds, especially when it comes to affinity. Whilst affinity is still useful on a charge blade, it is nonetheless something to think about. Now when it comes to the charge blade's axe form, when you're using axe attacks that consume PHIALs, it should be noted that these attacks also come with Mind's Eye. This was left out of the in-depth video, as I only mentioned the charged sword having the Mind's Eye effect. Now one thing I should have paid more attention to in the in-depth episode was cancelling out of your super amped elemental discharge. When using the charge blade and going for the super amped elemental discharge, there are many times where the monster will move as you're winding up that big swing. So they move out the way and you end up missing the attack and wasting your PHIALs. Well, there is a way to cancel this. As the weapon is winding up, you press back and triangle, or back and Y if you're on Xbox, to go from a super amped elemental discharge into a standard amped elemental discharge. This will still cause your hunter to attack directly in front of them, but it will only consume one PHIAL up instead of all of them. However, if you leave it too long whilst the super amped elemental discharge is winding up, to cancel out of it, you won't be able to, and you'll end up missing with the attack. It should also be noted that a single PHIAL will keep your shield charged for 30 seconds. Normally most charge blades come with 5 PHIAL charges, so this will keep your shield charged for about 2.5 minutes. However, you can increase this by using the magazine duel to allow your charge blade to have 6 PHIALs, which will mean charging your shield to potentially 3 minutes in one go. However, you can keep adding charge to your shield, but it will cap out at 300 seconds, which is about 5 minutes. Speaking of which, when you also charged your shield, it will allow you to block and withstand stronger attacks, basically giving you a built-in version of the guard skill. You can also add guard duels to your builds to increase this even more, meaning that you're able to block and withstand even tougher attacks. Which also brings me on to another point when it comes to guarding. Now you can perform guard reactions off of normal blocks, so just block an attack. If you follow that up with triangle and circle, it will allow you to perform a guard reaction amped or super amped elemental discharge on a monster, which comes in handy for burst damage and ensuring that you're able to land these big hits on the monster. Also, when you're using the charge blade, you may want to consider using the focus skill. The focus skill can basically increase how quickly you can actually charge your PHIALs up, which can become invaluable in getting all the PHIALs you'll need ASAP. And the last tip I can bring you for the charge blade is that you can actually charge your PHIALS against dead bodies. So if you're fighting multiple monsters, after you've slain one, consider charging your charge blade up on its corpse before going into the next monster. A bit morbid, but very useful. So there we have it, those were some advanced tactics and tips to help you with the charge blade. Whilst I tried to include as much information in the original in-depth episodes, some tips got left out due to mistakes, time constraints, or other reasons, and thus the reason for these advanced tactic videos. So I hope you found this video informative or helpful, and until the next time, I've been Darcblade, bringing you an advanced tactics guide to the charge blade in Monster Hunter World. Hope you enjoyed the video, thanks for watching, subscribe and like for more.